My name is Camila. I am 34 years old, and life as a single mom has never been easy. Between 12-hour nursing shifts and raising my 4-year-old son Jackson alone, I barely have time to breathe. When my daycare suddenly closed, my parents offered to help, saying those words I would come to regret, believing family takes care of each other. Then they handed me the bill, $1,500 a month. I was shocked but desperate, so I paid. If only I had known what I would discover next. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like and subscribe button, and get ready for a story about family betrayal and finding my worth. Before the childcare crisis turned my world upside down, I had managed to create a stable life for Jackson and myself. For 10 years, I had worked as a nurse at Memorial Hospital, slowly building my career while juggling the demands of single motherhood. Jackson's father walked out when I was 7 months pregnant, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility. Just like that, I was on my own facing parenthood without a partner or a plan. The past 4 years had been a constant balancing act. My mortgage payments took nearly half my monthly income, and the remainder was stretched thin between student loans, car payments, utilities, and all the expenses that come with raising a growing boy. We weren't living in luxury by any means, but we were getting by. Just barely. My daily routine was exhausting but necessary. I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning to prepare for my 12-hour hospital shifts. Jackson would still be sleeping when I would gently wake him, his sleepy eyes blinking in confusion as I helped him dress and prepare for the day. By 5:30, we would be in the car heading to Bright Future's daycare, where he would spend his day while I tended to patients-administered medications and documented everything in between. The daycare had been a godsend. Open early and closing late to accommodate healthcare workers, it wasn't cheap at $800 a month. But it was within my budget if I was careful with other expenses. Jackson loved it there, making friends and learning new things every day. Then came the notice that shattered our routine. Bright Futures was closing in 1 week due to the owner's unexpected health issues. 1 week. 7 days to find reliable, affordable childcare in a city where waitlists for quality daycares typically stretched for months. Panic doesn't begin to describe what I felt. I asked everyone at work for recommendations, called every daycare within a 20-mile radius, and even considered taking a leave of absence, though I knew my finances couldn't withstand the strain. That's when my parents Richard and Martha stepped in with their offer. "You know, Camila family takes care of each other," my mother said over the phone, her voice carrying that familiar tone of wisdom she used when dispensing life advice. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think we have a solution to your problem. Their house was only 15 minutes from mine, and they were both retired." It seemed like the perfect solution, especially since they already had experience watching my younger sister Alicia's daughter Emma, who was 5 years old. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated. Growing up, it seemed like my sister Alicia could do no wrong, while I was constantly falling short of their expectations. When Alicia joined the cheerleading squad, my parents attended every competition. When I made the debate team, they were too busy to come to the state finals. When Alicia needed money for college, they covered her tuition. I worked 2 jobs and took out loans. Small incidents, perhaps, but they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore, but had learned to live with. Despite this history, their offer felt like a lifeline, and I was overwhelmingly grateful. Jackson adored his grandparents, and the thought of him being cared for by family instead of strangers brought me immense relief. The day after their offer, I went to their house to discuss the details. Their home was a modest 2-story suburban house with a fenced backyard perfect for children to play. Inside family photos covered the walls, though I couldn't help noticing there were far more of Alicia, her husband Tom, and Emma than of Jackson and me. We sat at their kitchen table, the same one where I had done homework as a child, while Jackson played with some toys in the living room. So we thought we would go over the arrangements my father said, placing a notepad between us. Obviously, we'd need to adjust our routine to accommodate Jackson. Of course, I nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me again. "I can't tell you how much this means to me. You're really saving us." My mother smiled, patting my hand. "That's what family is for, honey. But we do need to talk about compensation." "Oh," I said, slightly surprised but understanding. I had been paying for daycare, so it made sense I would pay them something too. Of course. What were you thinking? My father cleared his throat. Well, we've looked at the market rate for full-time childcare, and considering the personalized attention Jackson will receive, we think $1,500 a month would be fair. The number hit me like a physical blow. $1,500. Nearly double what I had been paying at the daycare, and almost a third of my monthly take-home pay. 1,500. I repeated, certain I had misheard. My mother nodded. Payable at the beginning of each month, preferably by check. We need to adjust our retirement activities after all. Your father will have to give up his golf club membership, and I will need to pause my pottery classes. I swallowed hard, trying to mask my shock. The amount was astronomical compared to what I had budgeted, but what choice did I have? Daycares were full, I had to work, and Jackson needed care. I can make that work, I said, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. And we will need you to be punctual with pickups and drop-offs, my father added. We still have our own lives to live. Of course, I agreed, still reeling from the price tag attached to their familial duty. As I drove home that evening, Jackson chattering happily in the back seat about spending time with Grandma and Grandpa, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and I would figure out how to make it work. Family takes care of each other after all. At least that's what I had been told. The first few weeks after agreeing to my parents' terms were a blur of financial rearrangements and growing unease. The morning after our agreement, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, a notepad, and a gnawing sense of anxiety in my stomach. $1,500 a month was not just a stretch, it was a financial breaking point. I methodically went through my budget line by line. Mortgage non-negotiable, car payment necessary for work, utilities already bare minimum. Food could cut back slightly, but Jackson needed proper nutrition. The number simply didn't add up without significant sacrifices. That night, I made the difficult decision to cancel all our streaming services, our weekend pizza night tradition, and the small savings account I had been building for Jackson's future education. Even with these cuts, I would need to pick up at least one extra shift per week to make ends meet. The physical toll began immediately. Nursing is already demanding work requiring constant movement, critical thinking, and emotional resilience. Adding an extra 12-hour shift meant I was working 60 hours most weeks, coming home exhausted, with barely enough energy to be present for Jackson during our limited time together. About 3 weeks into this new arrangement, I began noticing subtle differences in how my parents treated Jackson compared to his cousin Emma. It started small. When I picked up Jackson one evening, my mother casually mentioned that Emma had stayed for dinner the night before. "Does Alicia work late on Tuesdays?" I asked, wondering why Emma had extended hours. "Oh, she had a yoga class," my mother replied. "It's important for young mothers to have self-care time." I nodded, swallowing the obvious question. Why wasn't my self-care considered equally important? The following week, my father called me at work an hour before I was due to pick up Jackson. "Camila, something has come up. We need you to pick up Jackson early today." I looked at the patients waiting to be seen, the medications that needed to be administered, the charts that needed updating. "Is everything okay? Is Jackson sick?" "No, nothing like that. Your mother's book club decided to meet at our house today. It's been scheduled for months. I couldn't leave early, not without jeopardizing my job. I asked if they could keep him just this once. Well, I suppose my father sighed, as though I had asked for an enormous favor. But this would be overtime rates, $25 per hour. I agreed, because what choice did I have? Yet later that evening, when I arrived to pick up Jackson, Emma was still there, playing contentedly while my mother and her friends cooed over her in the living room. Jackson was alone in the kitchen, coloring quietly. Just 2 days later, they called again with another emergency that required early pickup. And again, when I arrived later than requested due to a patient emergency, Emma was still there, receiving the attention and care that my son had been denied. The first real confrontation came a month into our arrangement. I had noticed Jackson becoming increasingly withdrawn after days with my parents. When I asked him about it, his answer broke my heart. Grandma says I'm too loud, and Emma is a good girl because she sits quietly, he told me, his voice small. That evening, I decided to address the issue directly. After Jackson was asleep, I called my parents. I wanted to talk about how things are going with Jackson, I began cautiously. He's quite a handful, my mother said immediately. Nothing like Emma was at his age. She was always so well behaved. His for mom. 4-year-olds are active and curious. That's normal and healthy. Well, my father chimed in, perhaps if you had more consistent discipline at home, he would be better behaved during the day. The conversation spiraled from there. I tried to explain that comparing Jackson unfavorably to his cousin was damaging to his self-esteem. They responded that I was being overly sensitive, and that they were merely pointing out areas where he could improve. Maybe you're feeling guilty because of how little time you spend with him. My mother suggested, her voice dripping with judgment. Children need their mothers, Camila. The accusation stung all the more because I was working myself to exhaustion precisely to afford their childcare rates. I'm grateful for your help, I said finally, trying to keep the peace. But I would appreciate if you could be more positive with Jackson and avoid comparing him to Emma. You're being ungrateful, my father said flatly. Do you know how many grandparents would refuse to help at all? We rearranged our entire retirement for you. I ended the call feeling defeated and increasingly concerned, but still convinced I had no better options. For Jackson's sake, I would need to make this work at least until I could find an alternative. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would only grow in the months ahead. 3 months into the arrangement with my parents, the strain was beginning to show in every aspect of my life. My once organized apartment now had piles of laundry in corners and dishes in the sink that I was too exhausted to wash. Dark circles had become a permanent feature under my eyes, and my scrubs hung looser on my frame as meals became whatever was quickest rather than what was nourishing. The financial pressure had intensified beyond what I had initially calculated. In addition to the $1,500 monthly fee, my parents had instituted a series of unspoken supplementary requirements. I was now expected to provide all of Jackson's food, snacks, diapers, for naptime changes of clothes, and educational materials. When I pointed out that the daycare had included snacks and activities in their rate, my father had simply replied, "We are not a commercial establishment, Camilla. We are family. Family." The word was beginning to leave a bitter taste in my mouth. More troubling than the financial burden was the emotional toll I could see the arrangement taking on Jackson. My once confident, exuberant little boy had become quieter, more hesitant. He would check with me before playing too loudly or making a mess, asking if I would be mad the way Grandma gets mad. One Tuesday evening in particular stands out in my memory. I had arrived to pick up Jackson after a grueling shift where we had lost a patient, a grandmother not much older than my own mother. All I wanted was to hold my son close and remember what mattered in life. When I entered my parents' house, I found Jackson sitting alone at the kitchen table working on a coloring book, while laughter echoed from the backyard. Through the window, I could see my parents with Emma pushing her on the new swing set that had appeared since my last visit. A swing set I had never been told about, and that Jackson apparently wasn't allowed to use. "Is that a new swing set?" I asked Jackson, trying to keep my voice light. He nodded without looking up from his coloring. "It's for Emma. Grandpa said I can't use it because I might break it." The casual cruelty of the statement nearly brought me to tears. Before I could respond, my mother came in from the backyard, Emma skipping behind her. "Oh, Camilla, you're early today," she said, glancing at her watch with a frown. "I'm actually 15 minutes late," I replied, my voice tight. "I had a difficult case." "Well," my mother sniffed, looking pointedly at Jackson. "Some of us have had a difficult day as well." Jackson refused to nap and then had a tantrum when we told him he couldn't have cookies before lunch. "Emma never gives us that kind of trouble," my father added, entering the kitchen with a proud smile at his other grandchild. The comparison hung in the air, as blatant as it was hurtful. I swallowed my retort, gathered Jackson's things, and left as quickly as possible. On the drive home, I caught Jackson looking sadly out the window. "What's on your mind, buddy?" I asked. His answer shattered my heart. "Why does Grandma like Emma better than me?" I pulled the car over, unable to drive through the tears that suddenly blurred my vision. Turning to face my son, I took his small hands in mine. "Grandma and Grandpa love you very much," I said, the lie burning my throat. Sometimes grown-ups are complicated and don't show love the same way to everyone. But I love you more than anything in this whole world, and that's never ever going to change." His small nod told me he wasn't fully convinced, but he squeezed my hands anyway. That night, after Jackson was asleep, I began researching alternatives to my parents' care with renewed determination. The extra shifts I had taken on made my eyes burn as I scrolled through daycare websites on my phone, but I persisted. Most had waiting lists of 6 months or more, but I added my name anyway, planting seeds for a future escape. Meanwhile, the rules from my parents continued to multiply. Jackson was not allowed to bring toys from home because they cluttered the house. He was expected to play quietly during my father's afternoon nap. My mother complained that his preschooler energy was exhausting her, but in the same breath would tell me about taking Emma to the park, the children's museum, or the library. The evidence of favoritism became impossible to ignore. One day, I noticed a new photo gallery on my mother's social media page, Grandma's Special Days with Emma. Dozens of photos documented ice cream trips, playground adventures, and baking sessions. There wasn't a single picture with Jackson. When I gently questioned this, my mother became immediately defensive. "Emma is easier to photograph. She sits still and smiles. Jackson never looks at the camera," she explained, as if this justified the complete erasure of one grandchild from her public display of grandmotherly affection. The final straw of this escalating tension came when I arrived one evening to find Jackson sitting in the corner of the living room, face tear-streaked. "What's going on?" I asked immediately, kneeling beside him. "He was naughty," my father explained from his recliner, not even looking up from his newspaper. "He took one of Emma's toys without asking." On the floor beside Jackson was a small toy car, the kind that cost perhaps $2 at a grocery store checkout. "Has he been sitting here long?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "About an hour," my mother replied from the kitchen. "He needs to learn to respect others' property." An hour of time out for a 4-year-old, for playing with a toy car in a house where he spent 40 hours a week. I gathered Jackson into my arms, feeling him bury his face against my shoulder. "I think we're going to head home now," I said, my voice shaking slightly with suppressed anger. "Remember, early pickup means you still owe the full day rate," my father called as we headed for the door. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The lump in my throat contained words too dangerous to release. But as I buckled Jackson into his car seat, I made a silent promise to both of us: this situation would not continue much longer. I just needed to figure out how to break free. The discovery that would finally push me to action came on an unseasonably warm Sunday in April. My parents had invited the family over for a barbecue, an event that had once brought me joy, but now filled me with dread. I almost declined claiming work, but Jackson had heard about it and was excited to see his cousin despite the unequal treatment. For him, I agreed to go. The afternoon progressed with the usual dynamic. My father tended the grill, lavishing attention on my sister Alicia and her husband Tom, while my mother fluttered around Emma like she was royalty. Jackson played quietly by himself in the yard, occasionally looking over at the adults with longing. After the meal, while the kids were distracted with dessert, I helped Alicia clear the table. We had never been especially close, even as children, but we maintained a polite relationship for family harmony. "Mom seems really energetic today," I commented, carrying a stack of plates to the kitchen. "Has she been feeling better? She always tells me she's exhausted after watching Jackson." Alicia looked surprised. "Really? She never complains about watching Emma. In fact, she often keeps her longer than we need, so they can have special grandmother time." I nodded, unsurprised by this confirmation of what I already knew. "Must be nice to have free childcare," I said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. Alicia froze a serving bowl suspended midair. "It's not free. We pay them." Something in her tone made me pause. "You pay them?" "Well, of course," she said with a laugh. "We couldn't expect them to watch Emma for nothing." My heart began pounding in my ears. "How much do you pay?" Alicia set down the bowl, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Just $300 a month. It's mostly symbolic, to show appreciation." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. $300. A fifth of what I was paying for the same service. less than I had paid the daycare that provided professional care activities, meals, and equal treatment for all children. 300. I repeated, my voice hollow. Alicia must have sensed something was wrong because her expression changed from confusion to concern. What do they charge you? 1,500, I replied mechanically. Her eyes widened. $1,500. Are you serious? That's insane. Camila, I excused myself, needing air, needing space, needing to process this betrayal. On the back porch, I leaned against the railing, taking deep breaths, 5 times what they charged my sister, for inferior care, for emotional manipulation and favoritism. When I returned inside, I found my parents alone in the kitchen, my mother arranging cookies on a platter, my father checking the baseball scores on his phone. I need to understand something. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Why do I pay $1,500 a month for you to watch Jackson when Alicia pays $300 for you to watch Emma? The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a glance that confirmed everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. My father recovered first. That's between us and Alicia. It's a completely different arrangement. Different how they are both your grandchildren. You watch them both during working hours. The only difference I can see is how you treat them. My mother set down the platter with a clatter. Your situation is completely different, Camila. You're a single mother. You need to learn responsibility. The words hit me like a slap. And Alicia doesn't need to learn responsibility because she has a husband. My mother sighed as if I were being deliberately obtuse. Alicia and Tom are building a life together. They contribute to society as a family unit. Your situation is, well, not what we had hoped for you. So, this is punishment, I said slowly, understanding blooming like a toxic flower. You're punishing me for being a single mother, for not living up to your expectations. We are helping you, my father insisted, his face reddening. Do you know how many people would be grateful for family willing to step in? At 5 times the price you charge your other child, I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. This isn't help. This is exploitation. Jackson is more difficult to care for. My mother countered. He requires more attention, more energy. He's 4, I nearly shouted. He's a normal, active 4-year-old boy who deserves love and attention from his grandparents, not to be treated like a burden while you dote on his cousin. The argument escalated quickly. Years of unspoken resentment surfaced from all sides. My parents accused me of ingratitude, of poor parenting, of being too sensitive. I accused them of favoritism, emotional manipulation, and using my desperation against me. The most painful moment came when my father, red-faced and gesturing wildly, finally revealed the truth it suspected all along. Maybe if you had made better choices, you'd be in Alicia's position. Some of us had to work hard for everything we got while you expect handouts. Handouts, I was paying them more than most daycares charged. I was working 60-hour weeks to afford their help. I was sacrificing time with my son to pay them to treat him as lesser than his cousin. Alicia entered the kitchen midway through the argument drawn by the raised voices. Instead of seeing the injustice, she defended our parents. They have their reasons, Camila. Maybe if you had been more responsible. I left before she could finish gathering a confused Jackson from the living room, where the children had been watching a movie. As I buckled him into his car seat, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage the straps. "Mommy, why are you crying?" he asked, his small hand reaching up to touch my cheek. I hadn't even realized I was crying. "Sometimes, buddy," I said, wiping my eyes. We have big feelings when we realize something important. And I just realized something very important about our family. On the drive home, as Jackson fell asleep in the back seat, I found myself cycling through emotions. Anger gave way to hurt to grief to determination. By the time we pulled into our apartment complex, my tears had dried, and in their place was a steel resolve. This was no longer about money. It was about dignity, about breaking a toxic cycle, about protecting my son from people who would never see his worth as equal to his cousins. That night, as Jackson slept peacefully, I made call after call, sent email after email, researched option after option. I would find a way out of the situation no matter what it took. My son deserved better, and so did I. The confrontation with my parents had opened my eyes to the true nature of our relationship, but I knew that emotions alone wouldn't solve my childcare crisis. I needed a practical plan before I could cut ties. Over the next week, I operated with a single-minded focus that surprised even me. First, I needed to secure alternative childcare. I called every center in a 20-mile radius, explaining my urgent situation. Most had waiting lists, as I expected, but the director at Sunshine Kids, a center about 15 minutes farther from my home than my parents' house, took pity on me after hearing a carefully edited version of my predicament. "We just had a family relocate unexpectedly," she told me. "The spot opens next Monday. It's $1,200 a month, which includes meals and extended hours if needed." $1,200 was still steep, but $300 less than what I was paying my parents, and for professional care without emotional manipulation. I put down the deposit the same day using my meager emergency fund. Next, I spoke with my supervisor at the hospital, Diane, a veteran nurse who had always been fair but firm. "I need to adjust my schedule," I told her, explaining that I was changing Jackson's childcare arrangement. I didn't share the full family drama, but I did mention that my current situation had become untenable. To my surprise, Diane was immediately supportive. "We can make this work, Camilla. You're one of our most reliable nurses. What days do you need?" We rearranged my schedule to match the daycare's hours, eliminating the need for one of my extra shifts. It meant working every other weekend, but the financial relief was worth it. Finally, I set up emergency contacts and backup care. I reached out to 2 other single moms from Jackson's previous daycare women I had exchanged pleasantries with but never really gotten to know. We arranged a mutual emergency support system. If one of our children was sick or childcare fell through, we would help each other when possible. With these practical arrangements in place, I was ready for the final confrontation. I arranged to meet my parents on a Tuesday morning when Jackson was at a neighbor's house for a play date. I chose a public place, a coffee shop midway between our homes, knowing my tendency to back down in the face of their disapproval. They arrived together. My father's face set in a scowl, my mother's expression a practiced mix of concern and martyrdom that I recognized from childhood disagreements. "Thank you for meeting me," I began after we had all ordered coffee. "I wanted to let you know that I've made other arrangements for Jackson's care." I had expected argument or anger. What I received instead was disbelief, followed quickly by derision. "You're being ridiculous," my father said, stirring his coffee with unnecessary force. "Where are you going to find quality care for that boy? I've already found it," I replied evenly. "Jackson starts at Sunshine Kids on Monday." My mother's eyes widened. "A commercial daycare, but they don't provide the personal attention we do. They don't love him like family." The irony of this statement might have been funny if it weren't so painful. Love hadn't been evident in how they treated Jackson compared to Emma. "I think it's best for everyone," I said firmly. "You've made it clear that watching Jackson is a burden for you, and I want him in an environment where he feels valued and welcome." "This is about the money, isn't it?" my father accused, his voice rising. "Alicia told us she mentioned what she pays. We have different arrangements with our children based on their situations." "That's our right. This isn't just about money," I replied, though that's certainly part of it. "This is about how you treat Jackson compared to Emma. This is about the emotional toll your favoritism is taking on my son." My mother's face hardened. "So now we're bad grandparents because we expect a 4-year-old boy to behave himself?" "No," I said, maintaining eye contact despite my instinct to look away. "You're showing favoritism when you put Jackson in timeout for playing with the same toys Emma is allowed to touch. When you take Emma on outings but leave Jackson behind. When you plaster your social media with photos of one grandchild and ignore the other." For a moment, I saw something like shame flicker across my mother's face, but it was quickly replaced by indignation. "We have done everything for you, Camilla," she said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Everything. And this is how you repay us, by accusing us of not loving our grandson." "I love you both," I said, surprised to find I meant it despite everything. "But I need to do what's best for Jackson and for me. and that means finding him care where he's treated with consistent kindness. What followed was 30 minutes of increasingly emotional manipulation. They accused me of being ungrateful, selfish, and short-sighted. They suggested I was damaging Jackson by depriving him of his grandparents' influence. They threatened that family events would become awkward. When these tactics didn't work, my father escalated to threats. "Don't expect us to be available when this new arrangement falls apart," he warned. "We won't be your backup plan." "I understand," I replied, gathering my purse and standing to leave. My mother tried one last approach, tears welling in her eyes. "We're family, Camila. Family takes care of each other." The words that had once seemed like a lifeline now revealed themselves as the chain they truly were. "Yes," I agreed softly. "Family should take care of each other equally, honestly, lovingly. That's exactly what I'm trying to teach Jackson." I walked out of the coffee shop with my heart pounding, but my resolve intact. In the car, I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to cry before driving to pick up Jackson, compartmentalizing my emotions the way I had learned to do during medical emergencies at work. The fallout was swift and extensive. My phone began buzzing with text messages before I even reached my neighbor's house to collect Jackson. My parents, then my sister, then aunts and uncles I rarely spoke to. The family gossip network had been activated, and I was being painted as the villain. I silenced my phone, focusing instead on preparing Jackson for the transition. That evening, I sat him down with his favorite stuffed dinosaur and a cup of hot chocolate. "I have some news, buddy," I said gently. "Starting Monday, you're going to go to a new school instead of Grandma and Grandpa's house." His reaction surprised me. Instead of confusion or sadness, his face lit up. "A real school, with other kids and toys I can play with." His excitement was both a relief and a heartbreak. How long had he been unhappy without being able to articulate it? How much had he internalized the unequal treatment? "Yes," I told him, hugging him close. "A real school with friends and teachers who will be so happy to meet you." As I held my son, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just determination, but the first fragile buds of freedom. The first weeks after cutting ties with my parents were simultaneously the hardest and most liberating of my adult life. Jackson's transition to Sunshine Kids daycare was surprisingly smooth, though our new morning routine required waking up 30 minutes earlier to account for the longer commute. His initial nervousness quickly gave way to excitement as he discovered classmates who shared his energy level, and teachers who praised his curiosity rather than punishing it. My days became a carefully orchestrated dance of time management. Drop off by 7 hospital shift from 7:30 to 7:30, pick up by 8 home for dinner and bedtime routine, then collapse into bed myself to start again the next day. The extra driving time added stress, but watching Jackson flourish made every exhausted moment worthwhile. The financial reorganization was equally challenging. I canceled my barely used gym membership, switched to a cheaper cell phone plan, and became an expert at meal prepping inexpensive but nutritious dinners. The $300 saved by switching from my parents' care to the daycare helped, but our budget remained tight. Still, for the first time in months, I wasn't working myself to exhaustion, with extra shifts just to afford childcare. The family fallout, however, was exactly as dramatic as I had feared. My parents told their version of events to anyone who would listen, portraying themselves as devoted grandparents, cruelly separated from their grandson by an ungrateful daughter. My sister Alicia, perhaps feeling guilty about her role in revealing the price discrepancy, doubled down on supporting our parents. Within days of our final conversation, I received calls from 2 aunts, an uncle, and even my mother's best friend, all expressing concern about the family rift and urging me to reconsider. I explained my position as calmly as I could, but few seemed interested in hearing my side of the story. The most difficult call came from my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, who had always been kind to me growing up. "I just don't understand, Camilla," she said, her disappointment evident even over the phone. "Your parents are heartbroken. They say they've done everything to help you, and now you won't let them see Jackson." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that she was hearing only one carefully edited version of events. I never said they couldn't see Jackson, I explained. I said I found more appropriate childcare, where he's treated equally to other children. But they're family, she insisted, echoing my parents' refrain. No one will ever care for him like family. I wish that were true, I replied softly. But when my son asks me why his grandparents like his cousin better than him, something is very wrong. There was a long pause before my aunt spoke again. Did he really ask that? Yes, I confirmed. Among other things that broke my heart. Another pause. Well, I still think children need their grandparents. But perhaps we could meet for lunch sometime, just you and me. It was a small opening, but one I gratefully accepted. At least one family member was willing to hear my perspective. On social media, the situation was equally uncomfortable. My mother posted thinly veiled references to ungrateful children and the pain of being separated from a beloved grandchild, carefully worded to garner sympathy without telling the whole story. My sister shared these posts, adding her own commentary about the importance of family unity. I refused to engage in this public drama, though each notification felt like a small stab wound. Instead, I temporarily muted their accounts and focused on rebuilding our life. The most unexpected support came from my coworkers at the hospital. When I no longer needed to pick up extra shifts, my colleague Tanya asked if everything was all right financially. Something in my expression must have revealed more than I intended, because she insisted on buying me coffee after our shift and listening to the whole story. That's emotional abuse, Camilla, she said bluntly after I finished explaining. Not just to you, but to your son. I had never labeled it so starkly, but hearing the words aloud brought a strange relief. I wasn't oversensitive. I wasn't ungrateful. I was protecting my child from harmful treatment. Tanya spread the word discreetly among our nursing team, and suddenly I found myself surrounded by practical support. Lindsay offered to swap shifts when the daycare had a teacher workday. Marcus, whose wife was a family lawyer, offered free consultation if I needed help establishing formal visitation boundaries. Elena invited Jackson and me for Sunday dinners, providing adult conversation for me and playmates for him in her own children. The parents at Sunshine Kids became another unexpected source of community. During a Saturday playdate organized by the center, I met Jasmine, another single mother, whose situation mirrored my own in many ways. We began carpooling one day a week, saving both of us time and gas money. Through her, I met other parents navigating the complexities of childcare work-life balance and family dynamics. As our support network expanded, Jackson blossomed. His teachers reported that he was socially engaged and developmentally on track in all areas. At home, I noticed he was sleeping better, having fewer tantrums and showing more independence. Without the constant comparison to his cousin and the walking on eggshells atmosphere of my parents' house, he was becoming the confident little boy I had always known he could be. 3 weeks after cutting ties with my parents, they made their first attempt at reconciliation. I arrived home from work to find them waiting in the parking lot of our apartment complex, my father pacing beside their car, my mother sitting rigidly in the passenger seat. My first instinct was panic. I had not given them our schedule or invited this visit. My second was protective rage at the boundary violation. Taking a deep breath, I parked several spaces away and texted my neighbor to keep Jackson at her apartment a bit longer. Camilla, my father called as I approached, his voice carrying the forced joviality he used when trying to smooth over conflicts. "We've been trying to reach you." "You could have called instead of showing up unannounced," I replied, stopping several feet away, arms crossed. "You haven't been answering our calls," my mother pointed out, emerging from the car. "We were worried." The concern might have seemed genuine, if not for the accusatory tone underlying it. "I'm fine. Jackson is fine," I replied evenly. "But this isn't an appropriate way to contact me. We want to see our grandson," my father stated, as if it were a simple request with a simple solution. "This has gone on long enough." "It's been 3 weeks," I noted. 3 weeks after years of unfair treatment. My mother stepped forward, her expression softening. "We've been thinking, and we'd like to offer a compromise. We can watch Jackson for free now." The offer took me by surprise, not because of its generosity, but because of its transparency. Not an apology for their behavior, not acknowledgement of the favoritism or emotional manipulation, just the removal of the financial burden, as if that had been the only issue. This isn't about money, I said, realizing as the words left my mouth how true they were. This is about how Jackson is treated compared to his cousin. This is about respect. We love Jackson, my mother insisted, her voice rising. How dare you suggest otherwise? I took a step back, physically and emotionally distancing myself from their manipulative tactics. I know you love him in your way, I said carefully. But love without respect and equal treatment is harmful, especially to a child. The conversation deteriorated from there, with my parents oscillating between guilt-inducing pleas and thinly veiled threats about family events and holiday gatherings. I remained firm in my position. I would consider supervised visits after they acknowledged the favoritism and committed to treating Jackson equally. They left unsatisfied, and I collected Jackson from my neighbor, my hands shaking, but my resolve intact. That night, as I tucked him into bed, he asked a question that affirmed my difficult decision. "Mommy," he said sleepily, "can I stay at the new school forever? The teachers there like me." "Yes, buddy," I whispered, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "The teachers there see how amazing you are, just like I do." As I sat beside his bed, watching his peaceful sleep, I realized that in trying to protect my son, I had also begun to heal myself. The patterns of favoritism and conditional love I had accepted as normal throughout my childhood were being broken not just for Jackson, but for me too. And despite the pain and family fractures, that breakthrough was worth every difficult moment. 6 months after making the decision to remove Jackson from my parents' care, our lives had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The initial chaos and emotional turmoil had gradually given way to a new normal that, while not perfect, was healthier and more sustainable than what came before. My work situation had improved dramatically. The consistent schedule and reduced stress at home allowed me to focus more fully on my nursing responsibilities. This renewed dedication led to an unexpected opportunity when my supervisor, Diane, recommended me for a charge nurse position on our unit. The promotion came with a $4 per hour raise and slightly more predictable hours, easing our financial strain considerably. With the additional income, I was able to build a small emergency fund again, and even open a modest college savings account for Jackson. We still lived carefully within our means, but the constant anxiety about money had diminished to a manageable level. Jackson continued to thrive at Sunshine Kids. His teachers praised his creativity and eagerness to learn, and he had developed close friendships with several classmates. Most heartening was the return of his natural confidence and joy, unhindered by constant comparison to his cousin or fear of arbitrary punishment. The teacher-parent conferences were a stark contrast to the daily criticism I had received from my parents. "Jackson's doing wonderfully," his lead teacher told me during our fall meeting. "He's exactly where he should be developmentally, and his social skills are excellent. You should be proud." I was proud both of Jackson and of myself for making the difficult choice that allowed him to flourish. Our home life had found a new rhythm too. Without the emotional drain of navigating my parents' manipulative behavior, I had more energy to be present with Jackson during our time together. We established new traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon nature walks, and bedtime stories where we took turns adding to the adventures of Captain Jackson, a brave explorer who could solve any problem. The family situation remained complicated. My sister Alicia maintained limited contact, sending occasional text messages about Emma, but avoiding any meaningful conversation about our parents. Extended family had largely stopped trying to mediate after my firm but polite refusals to discuss the matter further. My parents themselves had made several more attempts at reconciliation, each following a similar pattern: initial pleasantness, followed by subtle guilt trips, then increasingly direct accusations when their terms weren't accepted. I held firm to my boundary. I would consider supervised visits only after they acknowledged the unequal treatment of their grandchildren and committed to change. The breakthrough, when it finally came, was unexpected. My Aunt Susan, who had kept in touch through occasional lunches, called one October evening. "Your mother had a health scare. She told me quickly, adding, "She's fine, just a false alarm," but it got her thinking. She asked for your address. She wants to send Jackson a birthday card. It was a small gesture, but significant coming from my mother, who had previously insisted that any contact must include full restoration of the previous arrangement. 3 days later, a package arrived containing not just a birthday card, but a handwritten letter addressed to me. My mother's familiar handwriting filled 3 pages with what appeared to be a genuine, if imperfect, attempt at reflection. "I still don't fully understand your decision," she wrote, "but Susan has helped me see that perhaps we did treat Emma and Jackson differently. It wasn't intentional, but looking back, I can see how it might have appeared that way to you and to Jackson. I miss my grandson, and am willing to listen if you're willing to talk." It wasn't a full acknowledgement or apology, but it was more self-awareness than my mother had ever shown before. After discussion with my therapist, a wonderful woman I'd been seeing bi-weekly since the initial break, I decided to cautiously open the door to controlled reconciliation. I suggested a meeting at a neutral location, a park with a playground where Jackson could play while the adults talked. To my surprise, my parents agreed without argument to these terms. The meeting itself was tense, but ultimately productive. My father remained defensive, but my mother made a visible effort to listen without interrupting as I explained how their treatment had affected Jackson. "He's just a little boy," I told them, watching Jackson climb confidently on the playground equipment nearby. "He deserves to feel equally loved and valued, not constantly compared to his cousin." "We do love him," my mother insisted, but her tone lacked the accusatory edge of previous conversations. "I never meant to make him feel otherwise." My father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we were harder on him than Emma," he admitted reluctantly. "But boys and girls are different. We expected different behavior." I shook my head. Different expectations based on individual children is one thing, but the price discrepancy, the punishments, the exclusion from activities, that went far beyond normal differences in childcare. To my astonishment, my father didn't argue. He looked away, then back at me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I suppose we were unfair about the money. We thought we were teaching you responsibility, but perhaps we were punishing you instead." It wasn't a complete understanding, but it was progress. By the end of our hour together, we had established tentative ground rules for moving forward. Supervised visits once a month, no unannounced appearances at our home, and absolutely no negative comparisons between Jackson and his cousin. The reconciliation process was slow and sometimes painful. My sister remained distant, apparently threatened by the changing family dynamic. My mother occasionally slipped into old patterns of subtle criticism. My father struggled to connect with Jackson without reverting to rigid expectations of behavior. But there were also moments of genuine effort and connection. My mother brought photo albums to one visit showing Jackson pictures of me at his age. My father taught him to play checkers, displaying unexpected patience when Jackson wanted to make up his own rules. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Throughout this careful rebuilding, I maintained the boundaries that protected our new life. Jackson's time with his grandparents remained limited and supervised. Sunshine Kids continued as his primary childcare. Our new friends and support network remained central to our lives. Most importantly, I continued my own healing journey. Therapy helped me recognize patterns from my childhood that I had normalized, from the constant comparisons to my sister to the conditional nature of my parents' approval. I began to understand that the current situation wasn't just about protecting Jackson from favoritism. It was about breaking a generational cycle of emotional manipulation. One evening, as Jackson and I walked home from a play date at Jasmine's apartment, he asked a question that showed just how far we'd come. "Mommy," he said, swinging our joined hands, "are you happy now?" I looked down at his earnest face, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Despite the ongoing challenges, despite the family complexity, despite the still tight budget, the answer came easily. "Yes, buddy, I am happy. Are you?" He nodded emphatically. "I like my school and our home and our Saturday pancakes, and I like that you smile more now. Out of the mouths of babes," as my grandmother used to say. Jackson had captured exactly what had changed, not just our external circumstances, but my own internal state. The constant stress of navigating toxic family dynamics had lifted, allowing space for joy to return. That night, as I tucked Jackson into bed, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The decision to stand up to my parents had been terrifying. The financial and logistical challenges had been daunting. The family conflict had been painful. But the outcome, a happier, healthier life for both Jackson and myself, was worth every difficult moment. Family does take care of each other. But I had learned a crucial truth: sometimes taking care means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means walking away from unhealthy relationships, even with those we love. Sometimes it means building a chosen family of friends and supporters when blood relatives fail us. Most importantly, I had learned that my first responsibility was to my son and myself. By protecting Jackson from the favoritism and emotional manipulation I had experienced throughout my childhood, I was not just being a good mother. I was breaking a cycle that might otherwise have continued into his adulthood and beyond. As I closed his door and headed to my own room, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. We were going to be okay, Jackson and I. More than okay, we were going to thrive on our own terms, with or without my parents' approval. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your child or yourself from toxic family dynamics? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories helps others find the courage to make necessary changes in their own lives. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about navigating complicated family relationships. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, especially by those who claim to love you.